What's going on, everybody? This is Mitchell from Discord and Harmony, and today I want to do a new style of video. I want to talk about building team compositions, specifically the 2-2-2 comp, to try to help you guys understand the game a little bit better. It's a part of the game that I feel like I understand really well, especially for my level, because there are people all the time that I play with who just do not get it, and so I kind of want to break it down for you guys watching, and maybe it'll help you understand how to build your composition better when you're playing random games, because the 2-2-2 comp has been around basically since I started playing, since the game was released, because it's just such a well-balanced comp. So the idea of the composition is balance. That's your goal, to create the best balance as possible. So before I go into 2-2-2 specifics, let's talk about the 4 roles in Overwatch that there are. So the first role is the DPS role. It stands for damage per second. The second role is the tank role. Third role is the healer, and the fourth role is the builder. Now, the 2-2-2, basically what it stands for is 2 DPS, 2 tanks, and 2 healers. So, builder isn't really a part of a standard 2-2-2 comp. You can throw a builder in, and by the way, the only 2 builders in the game currently are Torbjorn and Symmetra. So that's why I said healer and not support, because Symmetra, even though she's in the support category, she actually falls into the builder role. So let's talk about the 2-2-2. One rule of thumb is you always want at least one main hero from each role in your lineup, and the most important of those 3 roles to have a main hero is the tank role. So you definitely want a main tank every single game, because I'll go into the main tanks a little bit more specifically. Just remember that you want a main hero for each role, and then for all 3 of the roles, it's better to have a main hero and a secondary hero. However, you can get away with 2 secondary heroes or 2 main heroes, but you're going to be a lot better off. This comp works a lot better. It's a lot more balanced with a main and a secondary. But like I said, when you're in competitive playing with randoms and solo queue, sometimes you can't control all the variables, but this is what you want to be striving for. So let's talk about each of those roles, and I'll talk about the main and secondary options for each of those roles. So let's start with DPS. The main DPS role is basically defined by their ability to do large amount of total damage and specifically reliable damage. So let's look at some options for that. So you have McCree, you have Pharah, you have Reaper, Soldier, Bastion, and Junkrat. All of these I consider to be main DPS heroes. Now, Pharah, since she uses projectile, she's a little bit less reliable, but she does have splash damage. And then Reaper, he's kind of a flanker, but he can also work on the front line, so he kind of depends on how you play. And then Junkrat, well, he is also a projectile user. He likes to spam chokes in places where it's very likely for him to get damage, so that's why I consider him the main DPS. Now let's talk about secondary DPS. Now secondary DPS is defined by their ability to clean up kills that are softened up by the rest of the team. So this is going to look like your Genji, your Sombra, your Tracer, Hanzo, and Widowmaker. All 5 of these characters are really good at picking off low targets, either due to their mobility with the first three with Genji, Sombra, and Tracer, or their range with Hanzo or Widowmaker. Now, so let's talk about the DPS. It's a lot better to combine the two. So you use your main DPS role to get the other team low, and then you use your secondary DPS to finish people off. So that's why you want one of each. I would say if you're going to run two, it'd be better to run two DPS. But it kind of depends on your composition. The only time I really ever see two secondary DPS be successful is on the dive comp, and this is about the 2-2-2 comp. So for this specific comp, you want a main and a secondary DPS. Okay, so let's talk about the tanks now. Like I said earlier, you want your tanks to be, you definitely want a main tank more so than any of the other roles. And the reason is that the main tanks are defined by their ability to absorb damage on the front line and open up fights through choke points. Now, if you think about it, this role is extremely important, because if you don't have anybody taking all that fire from the enemy team and kind of absorbing damage, then everybody else is getting hit. And a lot of the characters in the DPS role and the healer role are very squishy, and they can die to very little focus fire. It doesn't take much to take them out. So you really need to make sure you have somebody who has shielding, who has the ability to just stand at the front and be the shield. So speaking of shields, let's talk about the options. So your only two options right now are Reinhardt and Winston. Now, Reinhardt is amazing because he has a giant blue rectangle with 2,000 HP, and he can just walk straight through chokes, holding that up. And obviously that's a lot of damage that he can absorb. And then he also has a 500 health pool plus some armor, so he can also take the shield down, absorb a lot of health, put the shield back up, get healed up again. He's definitely the best main tank. And then Winston is considered a main tank because he works more so on the dive comp than the 2-2-2. But so if you're running 2-2-2, I recommend Reinhardt. But on like a King of the Hill map, Winston would be really good in the 2-2-2 because he can get in people's face in the front line, put his shields down, and jump out when he needs to. He's good for engaging. Now, the last person I have on the main tank is Orisa, and I have a question mark after this one in my notes because Orisa hasn't seen competitive yet, and she's really new. Actually, I guess she will have seen it by when I'm uploading this. I plan to upload it on Tuesday. But she still remains to be seen because, like I said, for main tanks, it's the ability to absorb damage and the ability to open up fights, and especially through choke points. And I do believe that she'll be good at absorbing damage with her 900 health barrier that has a fast cooldown, and her fortify ability. But I'm not convinced yet that she's going to be good at going through chokes on her own, that leading the charge through chokes. So we will see. But I think it's about a 50-50 chance on where she's going to land, whether it's main or secondary tank. But yeah, that's those are your options there. Definitely Reinhardt's the best one. And then, so let's talk about secondary tanks. So your secondary tank is defined by their ability to take damage, take the damage soaking load off of the main tank, and assist the DPS in securing kills. A lot of times you're gonna have your secondary tank is gonna have a lot more limbs and a lot more damage done than your main tank in most situations. So your options for secondary tank are D.Va, Zarya, Roadhog, and I also put Mei on this list. because it's really the best place she fits. I've heard off tank be a term used for her. She's kind of like if there's like a third tank under past secondary, then that's where she would go. But really, she's just a she can do tanking in that she has her wall and her freeze ability to help gain HP back and absorb some damage. But yeah, any D.Va, Zarya, and Roadhog work very well on many different styles of composition. So really, any of those work in most situations. Okay, so let's talk about the healers finally. So you have your main healers, and that's defined by just HPS, healing per second. It's just the ability to do large amounts of healing and keep the tanks alive. So your tanks are going to be taking most of the damage, so you need to be filling them back up with health. And your best options for that are Ana and Mercy. Now with well, never mind. I was going to say with Ana's nerf, maybe not the case, but they've nerfed her damage, not her healing. So her healing's actually still really good. And then the secondary healers, and that's going to be that role's defined by their ability to assist the main healer in keeping the tanks alive, and they're also better at keeping flankers, at killing flankers, sorry. And I missed a word in my notes. At keeping flankers alive, so they're better at healing up the flankers, and they're also they also provide more utility than just healing. So, for example, your two options are Lucio and Speed Boost, and that utility would, losing it, guys. Lucio and Zenyatta. So the utility for Lucio would be his Speed Boost, and then the utility for Zenyatta would be his Discord. So yeah, those are your options for all of the roles. You, like I said again, I want to emphasize this as much as possible. You want a main and a secondary hero for each role. If you're playing online, you should try to build this to the best of your ability. And the key here is a lot of times people will scrutinize the DPS position for doing poorly, and then more people will switch to DPS characters to try to fix their position, fix their composition. And I want to stress how bad of an idea this is in most situations. And actually, in a lot of situations, it's better for the DPS to switch to something else. So let's talk about the relationship that each role has on each other and why I said that. So think of this composition as kind of a triangle where all three of the roles are each end. And imagine if every player on each role was an equal skill level. That's like the best case scenario, and that team will win a majority of the time. Because like I said at the beginning of the video, this composition is all about balance and finding the right balance and skill level. So what often happens when you play online is the highest skilled players will instantly lock the they call it carry heroes, is a common term, and that's your DPS heroes. And so let's talk about how each role relates and what the consequences of your best players always picking your DPS roles, what that might be. Okay, so your tank, what it does is it absorbs damage and it allows the DPS to be free to attack the enemy. Your DPS kills the enemy flankers and protects the healers, and then the healers keep the tanks alive by healing them. So, as you can see, each of the roles rely on a different role in the team to succeed. It kind of reminds me of the checks and balances system in the U.S. government. So if the two best players on the team instantly pick the DPS role, what happens most of the time is the two worst players on the team are stuck healing. So what happens in that situation? The healers will be unable to heal the tanks due to lack of skill, right? Because if the tanks are doing their job, they're absorbing a lot of damage. And since the tanks aren't being healed very well, they won't be able to absorb as much damage on the front line, so they'll have to back off a little bit. And as the tanks back down, it's going to allow the enemy team to apply more pressure, and a lot of times it's going to allow them to kill the squishier characters, being that DPS. And even though the better players are on the DPS role, there's too much pressure coming in from the enemy team that's not relieved by the tanks, because the tanks can't get healed. And so what happens is that people see the DPS not killing anything, and they immediately blame the DPS, even though sometimes the best players are on DPS. So the way to fix this issue is to switch one of your DPS characters or players with either your tank or your healer, to try to help patch up some of these holes, depending on what you think is the weakest point in the source. That's the hardest part, because it's all related, is finding the actual source of the issue. So if you are trying to use I have gold damage and gold elims as an excuse for why you shouldn't switch, what you should be thinking is, I have gold damage, gold elims, I'm making the most impact on my team, especially if you're playing a character that shouldn't be doing that. Ask yourself, what role is slacking the most, and I should switch to them. I should switch to that role to pick up the slack, and that's how you balance your team out more and create a functional 2-2-2 team composition. So that's it for the video, guys. I'm not sure how long it is. Let's see, 17 minutes. So I'll probably keep that all one, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this style of video. And if so, I'll probably make another one for the tank. So 3-2-1. It's actually, I think they call it 3-2-1 for the attacking dive comp as well. But yeah, we'll cover dive comp, and we'll also cover the tank composition. So, alright guys, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Follow us on Twitter, and I'm out.